So today we're going to look at how to do ambient occlusion for the 3D models in Banished. Now I'm using 3D Studio Max, but this is going to apply for any 3D software that you're using. The important thing to understand is that the ambient occlusion of your 3D models uses UVW channel 2. That's really the main thing we're going to look at. So here we go, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a light to our scene. I'm just going to use a standard skylight. Now in 3D Studio Max it'll have a bit of a blue tinge to it. I'm just going to make it completely white and drop one in the scene. So we're going to do the ambient occlusion for this barn model here. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide everything else so that only the mesh that we're doing the ambient occlusion for is visible. Looks like we've got a bit of a pivot issue on this barn. I'll fix that later. Anyway, so with the barn selected, first thing you want to do is I'm going to hit F10, and this is basically your render setup in 3D Studio Max. It'll be under rendering at the top of the screen, or you can hit F10. Now for renderer, I'm going to switch to NVIDIA Mental Ray. You can use Scanline Renderer as well. If you're using different 3D software, you're going to need to use whatever renderer that software comes with. So what we want to do is we want to render to texture. And in 3D Studio Max we can hit 0 on the keyboard, or we can go up to the rendering section and we can select it from the list here. So the first thing to do is a very basic setup under render settings. Remember, this is 3D Studio Max. I'm just going to choose Mental Ray Daylighting High. You can literally choose any of them. We're going to do an automatic unwrap. I'm not going to unwrap the AO by hand or spend a lot of time on it, and I'm going to make sure that we're doing it on channel 2. So all we're doing is automatically unwrapping to channel 2. That's it. That's basically the whole thing about getting your AOs in, is dropping the light in the scene. In this case we've got a skylight, and doing the automatic unwrap. So here under output I'm going to choose ambient occlusion, Mental Ray, and let's change its settings to be PNG. Give it a name. Any name that you want to give it is fine. Now choose the size of that PNG. Make sure the target map slot is the diffuse color, and then for the size, the default apiary example in Banished is 1024 by 1024. Depending on the size of your building or part or decoration or whatever it is you're doing the AO for, you need to make a decision based on how much memory we're going to be using. I'd probably leave it at the default 1024 by 1024 for this. The next thing that's very important is to render to files only. That's very important. I'm also going to click output into source. I don't want to create a shell. That's just going to mess up the materials. So render to files only. Now that's it. We're done. As soon as we hit render, it's going to create an AO map for this building. There's some more settings down here, automatic map size, etc. You can tweak around with those, but basically all we've done is drop a light in the scene, select our mesh, set up the renderer that we're going to use, and make sure we're just unwrapping onto channel 2. That's the only important bit. So if you're using different software such as Blender or anything else, you basically just need to set up an unwrap on channel 2 with a light in the scene, and then go ahead and render that out to a PNG texture. So we're just going to hit render here. It's automatically flattening, and here comes our AO. Of course in Max, the first thing it does is the gather points, just sort of like a really super rough draft of where it's going to grab, and now it goes through actually baking that AO. So when this is finished, it'll take a minute, we're going to have this 1024 by 1024 pixel AO map, and it's going to be set onto UV channel 2 of the mesh. So when we save that mesh and set this AO up in Banished through the RSC files, we'll get a nice AO which is baked in. Of course, Banished uses baked ambient occlusion. A lot of games now, particularly those that are relying on Unreal Engine and Unity Engine, a lot of them are doing real-time lighting AO, which is quite resource intensive. So for Banished, this is really all we need, and we're almost done. So I hope that's been helpful. It's really just a simple case of getting the unwrap on channel 2. The reason why it's fine to use an automatic flatten like this, normally you'd never do this. Look at all the little bits and pieces on this unwrap, yeah? Normally that's madness. You'd never do something like that. The reason why it's fine is because we're doing on the diffuse slot just for the lighting, just for black and white darkness for the AO, yeah? All of this is black and white. It's not going to matter. We don't have to go and move things around on a texture, do texturing. This is literally just a map of black and white. And so having all this tiny little debris everywhere in this unwrap map, it's not going to affect anything at all whatsoever. Sometimes with very complex models, this may become an issue. Depending on your spacing as well, you may get a bit of bleed in between, and you may have to just go and tweak some settings to get that fixed. I've done dozens, probably 100 meshes for Banished now with this AO, and everything's usually always gone fine. I'm just going to drop to the desktop, and here's our PNG. And here it is. So everything is good. Well, I hope that's been helpful. So depending on your software, just get that unwrap on UV channel 2, drop a light in the scene, render it out to a texture. I will make a note though, if you are using 3D Studio Max, such as I am, make sure that in your material editor, whether you're using the Slate or the classic version, don't have anything attached to your diffuse slots. Don't have any of the textures in. Just have this grey standard material. Don't actually allow the textures to display on the model when you're doing this target map slot to diffuse, because if I turn the textures on right now, they're off. If I turn the textures on, our rendered texture won't be black and white. It'll be like a normal atlas texture with all the colors, and that's going to ruin your AO. You might end up with some very dark models. So I hope that's been helpful. That's it from me. Okay, bye bye.